Hello, welcome to another session on our series on how to break through the Scrum job in 2024. And sorry, I'm kind of a couple of minutes late today, but I'm hoping it's going to be an engaging day. And today we want to focus on talking about release planning, but we're still going to be able to take your questions. So if you have any questions, make sure that you put them in the chat box, and we are going to handle this question as we move along. But for now, I want you to tell me where you're connecting from so that I can give you a shout out. Before we go into our session for today, we're going to be talking about release planning. And I guess you're going to see how easy release planning is. And I'll talk about the role of a Scrum Master in release planning as well. So put on a comment. Let me know where you're watching me from, and also make sure that you can subscribe to my YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. By next week, we're going to be putting together a lot of interactive learning videos for you in order to help you really close the gap. So make sure that you are um, subscribing as well. All right. For those who watching me on LinkedIn, make sure you follow me on LinkedIn. I'm putting out daily learning content almost every day. We'll pick one stuff, we'll talk on it for about 1 to 2 minutes so that it can keep us really engaging and learning all the time. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, Karen from Dallas, Texas. Hello, Taro from Quebec. Oh, wow. Great. And I see Francois from Maryland. Francois, I guess I'm going to be meeting you soon. I see Waters from Toronto, Canada. Okay, everybody, welcome, and let's get started. So please feel free to share so that anyone that wants to join us can join us in the live session so that we can all have a conversation. And I'll definitely be taking your question. Okay, so today we want to talk about release planning. So, what exactly is release planning? Now, the first thing about Scrum is that most of the words you come across, you're going to be familiar with them. But you can also choose not to be familiar with them by complicating the whole issue, right? Now, let's take, for instance, I like to teach with scenarios, I like to teach with example. If you hear the word release planning for the first time, release planning for the first time, let's assume that you've never studied Scrum before and you hear the word release planning for the first time, what comes to your mind? It's a combination of two words, right? One, the first word is release, and the second is planning. Now, let's combine this word together. It simply means that we need to plan exactly when we need to release what we are building. As easy as that. Now, if we take the concept and I'll bring it into the Scrum environment, which is where you need to make a second connection, right? If you take release planning, which we've defined that release planning simply means that we are looking at a time where we are going to release what we are building. Now, at the second time, we are also looking at the word Scrum or the role of a Scrum Master in release planning, or we're looking at the concept of Scrum. What exactly is Scrum? Scrum is a framework that helps us to deliver business value to the customer using an incremental approach with a focus on the customer and continuous improvement, right? Based on my word, on my definition. So it means that the work that we are planning, we are releasing to what? The customer. So in a nutshell, release planning simply means that when do we plan to release, because we're building incrementally a part of the product to the customer, and how do we know exactly what we are releasing at a given time? Okay. Let's assume, let's take a practical example. if most of us are familiar on with Amazon, let's use Amazon. Amazon is an example we can all get familiar with, right? And Amazon, it's planning to release a new feature to the public, and that future is definitely going to help people to be able to order goods and maybe pay them instrumentally as they want, right? Let's just assume that that doesn't happen. The first thing, they need to be able to have an action plan on when it's going to be a good time to launch this new feature. Is this something that is going to be affected by the market season? Is it something that's going to be affected by the location? Is it something that's going to be affected by the type of software people use? So based on that, Amazon can plan to say, okay, we are first of all going to give access to the people in the West Coast to use it first, right? So the plan to release it first to the people in West Coast, they open it up to that market, and then they get feedback from there, and they plan the second release to extend to maybe the East Coast, and then they plan the third release to happen maybe in their external market out of North America. Let's take it now to the theory and see exactly what it's all about. If you look at the concept right here, which is release plan, and I kind of just make it in a picture form so that you can be able to clearly understand what we're talking about. So when we talk about release planning in Scrum, the first thing you need to understand about Scrum is that Scrum is about incremental delivery, right? And you realize that we have uh, Spring 1, Spring 2, Spring 3 within the first release. So this simply means that what are we capable of delivering within the first 6 weeks, right? So it means that it doesn't mean that every spring we're going to release, every spring we're going to release. In some environment, we might even release once every 3 months. In some environment, we might release weekly. In some environment, we might release every 3 weeks. So release planning doesn't really have a specific cadence as we have in Scrum. It's more focused on when the customer need what we are building. And this is the reason why every time we build during the spring, we release to production. We release to production so that it can wait at the production center until when the customer need it before we release in it. And why do we kind of separate? Why do we don't just build and give out to the customer immediately? I'll give you another example. Let's assume that um, you take your car to the mechanic, right? And the mechanic need to do some work there. And at the end of the day, the mechanic is done with the work. But then another person, let's say they had some other extra work like painting to be done on the work. Will you kind of just say, okay, because the first person is done, let it come back to you, or you're going to wait until when the second person, the painting is done? Now you realize in some of the cases, although we might be building value every spring, for us to accept some of the value, we need to kind of group it together for it to make sense. So release planning, first of all, is taken from the roadmap. So we look at the roadmap, look at what are the expectations, and then we break down the futures into the roadmap into story. We do story mapping. We actually map out the story so that we can understand what is priority to the customer. And we look at what is priority to the customer based on the business value the customer want to draw from it. Now, if you're in a scale agile environment, you are going to master this by collaborating with the program level. This is which is where business values are being assigned. But then, if you're in the Scrum environment, this is going to be a collaboration between you and the product owner. The product owner is communicating with the customer, and then the customer is giving the feedback on how we prioritize this. So using our invest criteria or using our Moscow or using our deep criteria, we can be able to prioritize what is what and how to effectively deliver that. And then we can now see what the customer need. Is it every 3 weeks? Is it every 4 weeks? And we can plan release to happen by then. Now, if you look at the other picture, release planning is very important because it helps us to prioritize our backlog, right? It helps us to prioritize our backlog. So we make sure that the items that are very close to the release are prioritized at the top of the backlog. And this is where the product owner comes in. The product owner owns the backlog. The product owner is in constant communication with the team and the customer and understand how to prioritize this work based on the need of the customer. So you realize that things that will be released in the third release are pushed right down to the bottom. And secondly, you realize that they are not even yet sized. So the things that are at the top of the backlog should be prioritized, effectively sliced to smaller sizes so that we can effectively predict when to get it out. All right. Now, as a Scrum Master, one of the way you can participate in release planning is to be able to collaborate with the Scrum Master to enforce clarity in prioritization. What you can also do is that you can be able to tag stories into different releases by using the fixed version option in Jira. So if you use the fixed version option in Jira, you can be able to tag release 1 into version 1.1, release 2 into version 1.2, release 3 into version 1.3, right? So that when we actually click on releases, we can be able to see how the stories are being bent down, right? We can see what stories has been completed, what is left. So if you go on your fixed version and click on your release, you should be able now you should have the information that will help you guide your team on what they need to focus on and what they need to prioritize. Right. So that is release planning. Now, in some of the cases, you, the Scrum Master, might not be engaged in release planning at all. You might have a whole release team which is different from the Scrum team. So it is not in all environment that the Scrum Master is engaged in release planning. Right. Because with release, especially when we are actually releasing the final document out to the customer, right? Where we are doing our checklist, we are doing the go and the no go check, we're uh, um, looking at the release environment. We are looking at our code freeze. We freeze the code so that we can start releasing, and which is the reason why many companies actually release the middle of the night or during the weekend, because while we are releasing, we don't want to alter anything. We need to freeze the environment, and you, the Scrum Master, need to understand the different features or the different components that need to be released if you are engaged in release, and just make sure you're checking the list of what actually went where and what did not go where, and where you can enforce communication in order to help the team perform better. Okay. So that takes us to the end of our conversation on release planning. So release planning is definitely nothing too big. It's just a simple tool. Okay, one of the things I'm going to do next week, on Monday, which is going to be our next session, Q&A session, I'm going to focus on a bit on PI planning and the role of Scrum Master in PI planning. That it's a bit something that threw a lot of people off, but the PI planning is very simple environment if you understand exactly what you're doing. All right, time to take your questions. And before I take your questions, if I did search yesterday that one of the reason why it's important to get into conversation like this, excuse me, one of the reasons why it's important to get into conversation like this, or why we actually sacrifice the time to come on board and do this is not for fun, is to be able to help someone who is in the process. When we go through this concept, you now do an assessment of yourself based on what has been discussed. Do I need to learn something? Is there a gap that is missing? What are questions that I have? Maybe I was thinking that this is the way this thing should be, but I'm learning something new. So it helps you to make your own self and personal assessment, and now help you to be able to identify the type of help that you need. Right. And for those who actually need help with interview preparation, feel free to reach out. You can send me a private message on LinkedIn. You can send me a text message on my number, which is definitely personal to scroll down. And I will be able to get an appointment with you and see how I can help you, or we can help you. All right, let's look at the questions that we have. There's a question. Um, okay, it's not a question. It's not a question. It's just a comment. Let me see. Anybody have a question that we need to answer? Or I think this was the release planning session was really quick and simple, straight to the point. So, if you have a question or any other question you want me to answer before I take my leave, this is the right moment to do that. All right. If not, I think I have two promises which I am keeping to when I'm doing this live presentation. So the first promise I'm having for this series of this presentation, offering my ebook for free this week for those who want to learn what they need to do in order to close the gap in the market. So I'm going to put the link on the chat. You can actually download that for free for a limited time. Three steps on how to get and keep a Scrum Master job. It's actually a very important book. And I was thinking I'm gonna get one out this end of this month, but I'm working on another book called the Scrum Master Handbook, I would say, or playbook, I would say. That is more of a tool that kind of gives you a deeper understanding of the Scrum concept in practice from a practical perspective. Okay, so the question, okay, Krista says, what do Scrum Masters do before a release planning? You double check and make sure that everything that is supposed to go into that release is ready and is completed. So you need to do a quick check. You need to do a quick check at least 1 week or 2 weeks before the a better version of a scrum master that is engaged in sprint and release planning is that make sure that the work that need to go into a release is planned to be completed at least 2 weeks before the release date, so that if for any reason you're missing out on something, you have at least one sprint to close that gap. So the bigger goal of a scrum master before the release is just to make sure that all the stories that are tagged into the release are ready and are ready to go. Now, if for any reason you are also the release manager, you might need to check about the environments that we're going to be releasing from, and make sure that the environment is ready and all of that. Okay, perfect. Everyone, have a great weekend. It's a Friday. Okay, have a great weekend, and do not forget to continue to then. I'll see you next week.